The numbers on the screen bled into a gray, meaningless haze. I was deep in the third quarter reports, the kind of soul-crushing financial analysis that required absolute focus and a near-complete suppression of one's personality. My office, a sleek glass box on the 14th floor overlooking a rain-slicked Boston, was a monument to that suppression, all cool steel, minimalist furniture, and a view designed to remind you of your place in the corporate machine. The only personal touch was a single, framed photograph on the credenza, turned away from me. I didn't need to look at it to know what it was, a sun-dappled dock stretching out into the placid, blue expanse of Lake Champlain. My laptop chimed, a soft, melodic tone that was utterly at odds with the jolt of dread it sent through me. The screen flashed the caller ID, the Davis home. It pulsed, a digital heartbeat that felt less like an invitation and more like a warning. A summons. I let it chime 3 more times, my pen hovering over a column of disputed figures. Answering would derail my momentum for the next hour. Not answering would mean a cascade of follow-up texts, escalating in pitch from concerned to wounded to accusatory. With a sigh that felt dredged from the bottom of my soul, I pressed accept. My mother's face filled the screen, radiant and effervescent. The background was the familiar, overstuffed floral chaos of the living room in Burlington. She was literally glowing, her skin dewy, her eyes sparkling with a triumphant joy that I knew, from a lifetime of experience, was a prelude to my own diminishment. "Leona, sweetie. Oh, I'm so glad I caught you. You look tired. Are you getting enough sleep?" "Never mind, we have the most wonderful news," she chirped, her voice a saccharine melody that set my teeth on edge. That voice, that particular lilt of unearned celebration, had always been the herald of a loss. It was the tone she used when she told me we were giving my childhood dog away because he shed too much, when she announced my art lessons were being canceled to free up time for math tutoring, when she explained that my college fund had been reallocated to something more pressing for Brianna. It was the sound of something being taken from me, wrapped in the pretty paper of familial bliss. I leaned back in my expensive ergonomic chair, the leather groaning in protest. I tapped my Mont Blanc pen, a gift to myself for a deal well closed, against the polished surface of my desk. A steady, metronomic click. 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 A tiny anchor in the rising tide of her enthusiasm. "What happened, Mom?" As if on cue, my father's face nudged into the frame, his arms slung around my mother's shoulders. He was beaming, his face a roadmap of creases born not from worry, but from a lifetime of having his decisions validated. He looked like a man who had just hit the jackpot with a ticket he found on the street. "You know how Brianna has been just so stressed about the wedding?" Mom began, not waiting for an answer. "The venue, the caterer, the sheer cost of everything. It's been a nightmare for the poor thing. She's been a wreck. A real bridezilla," Dad added with a chuckle, as if it were a charming quirk and not a fundamental character flaw we'd all been financing for a year. "But it's all settled now," Mom announced, her hands fluttering up to clasp beneath her chin. "Completely and wonderfully settled." I said, the sound non-committal and heavy with caution. My grip tightened on the pen. My mother's eyes glittered with a triumphant gleam. "We sold your lake house." The words landed not as a sentence, but as a physical blow. The room, my pristine, controlled office, seemed to tilt on its axis. The gray sky outside the window swam, and for a dizzying second, I felt utterly unmoored. The pen stilled in my hand. "What did you say?" My own voice sounded distant, foreign. "Your lake house," my mother repeated slowly, as if I were hard of hearing or perhaps just simple. "In Vermont. We got an amazing offer, Leona, truly. A full 20% over the asking price. Can you believe it? We transferred the deposit for Brianna's venue this very morning. The Clifton Manor. Isn't it just wonderful?" I didn't move. I couldn't. The air in my lungs had turned to stone. That house wasn't just bricks and mortar, a line item on an asset sheet. It was a refuge I had built with my own hands, my own ambition. It was the smell of pine and lake water, the creak of the old porch swing, the way the morning sun cut a path across the wide plank floorboards. It was peace. It was the one space in the world that was unequivocally, irrevocably mine. You weren't even using it, Lee, my father added, his tone shifting to one of pragmatic, paternal condescension. It's been sitting empty for, what, 2 years now? A place like that, it's a waste. Taxes, upkeep, it was a drain. I work, Dad. In Boston. It's a 6-hour drive. It's not a weekend vacation home, I managed, the words tight. Exactly, my mother chirped, seizing on this as validation. So why let a beautiful asset just go to waste? Brianna deserves the wedding of her dreams, and now she'll have it. The dress, the flowers, the 7-tier cake, everything. And it's all thanks to you. It's your gift to her. I felt something in my chest, a fragile, carefully maintained structure of duty and resignation, tighten and then lock into a cold, hard knot. A gift. They had stolen my sanctuary, my independence, and were presenting it back to me as an act of my own generosity. Great, I forced out, the single-syllable tasting of ash. Mom clapped her hands, a sound like gunshots through the speakers. I knew you'd understand. You've always been the practical one, so generous with your family. Brianna will be thrilled, my father added, beaming again. She was so worried about the budget. She already is. Mom gushed. She picked out her dress yesterday. Wait until you see it, Leona. It's hand-sewn Italian silk, with these tiny pearl beads all over the bodice. She looks like an absolute princess. They kept talking, their faces, full of uncomplicated joy and self-congratulation, floating in the little window on my screen. They had just dismembered a fundamental piece of my life, sold the keystone of my sanity, and they were discussing it as if we were planning a family picnic. They were utterly, blissfully unaware of the cataclysm they had just set in motion. So anyway, my mother said, adjusting the camera with a practiced hand, we just had to share the good news. We'll send you all the details for the wedding. Save the date. Love you, sweetie. Love you too, I replied, the phrase a rehearsed, muscle memory calm. My finger moved to the trackpad and clicked the red end call button. The silence that descended was louder and more profound than all their chirping words. It was a vacuum, sucking the warmth and the light from the room. I slowly closed my laptop, the soft click of the latch final and absolute. The photograph on the credenza seemed to hum with a new, accusing energy. I reached for my private mobile, the one with no corporate ties, and scrolled through a short list of contacts. There was only one person in the world who would understand the precise, devastating geometry of this betrayal. My mind flashed back to the day I bought that house. I was 28, riding the high of my first 7-figure bonus. I did it alone. No co-signers, no proud parents co-signing the mortgage, no congratulations from my family. It was just me, a no-nonsense real estate lawyer from Montpelier, and a banker in New York who, for the first 3 months of our email correspondence, had addressed me as Sir. I hadn't corrected him. It felt like a victory. The house sat in a quiet, forgotten cove on the lake, a sturdy, cedar-shingled structure with a wide, welcoming porch and a dock that stuck out into the water like a stubborn chin, defying the winter ice. I furnished it slowly, painstakingly, over the course of a year. It was a collection of me, not the me my family knew or the me my job required. Second-hand books with someone else's notes in the margins filled the shelves. A worn, buttery soft armchair sat by the stone fireplace. Hand-knitted throws from a near-blind Vermont artisan who, for 3 years running, called me Laura sat folded over the couch. It wasn't luxurious, but it was mine. The only space untouched by the sticky webs of guilt, expectation, and the exhausting duty to play a part. I didn't even tell my family about it until 6 months after the closing, a secret I hugged to myself like a talisman. And when I did, over a stilted Sunday dinner, my mother had barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. A house in Vermont? Must be nice, was all she'd said, the dismissal so complete it was almost an art form. That was the night I'd first started sending money home. It began subtly, almost as an apology for my own success. $300 for a utility bill that was just a little behind. A credit card payment for my father that was about to skyrocket with interest. Then it was Brianna's tuition for a semester abroad, a new boiler when the old one gave out, a car lease for Dad when his wasn't reliable for his commute. By the second year, it was all automated, A complex web of scheduled transfers through shell accounts and online banking, a silent, financial life support system. I never talked about it. They never asked where the money came from. It was easier for them that way, to accept the manna without acknowledging the hand that provided it. At some point, I stopped counting the money. And with a quiet, profound sorrow I never allowed myself to examine, I stopped visiting the house, too. It was less painful to imagine it clean and untouched, waiting in a state of perfect potential, than to return and feel the ghost of that potential, to see it in my mind's eye already filled with the unspoken, ever-growing needs of my family. But there was one thing I hadn't forgotten. One piece of foresight, born not from paranoia, but from a deep, cellular understanding of my family's dynamics that I had executed 18 months after buying the place. I had transferred the deed. I'd moved it out of my personal name and into a dormant holding company I'd set up back in grad school for a business plan that never materialized, Waymand Holdings. I'd done it on a rainy afternoon, a task sandwiched between more pressing work. No one knew about it. Not my accountant, not my financial advisor. Not even Ashley, my oldest and most trusted friend, though she'd been the one to help me file the original incorporation papers years before. I'd done it not because I expected them to literally steal from me, but because somewhere deep in my bones, I knew they might. It was an insurance policy written not on paper, but on the title itself, hidden in the bland, impenetrable language of corporate registry. Now, with hands that were unervingly steady, I took out my personal laptop, the one that never touched the corporate network, and opened an encrypted drive. A few clicks, and there it was. The digital fortress containing my life's true ledger. The original deed in my name. The transfer documents to Waymand Holdings. Years of tax filings for the entity. A quiet, separate insurance policy. It was all there, a complete and unassailable history, hidden in plain sight. Then I called Ashley. "Leona," she answered on the second ring, her voice warm but laced with surprise. "Wow. Long time no hear. Everything okay?" "I need a favor," I said, bypassing any pleasantries. The knot in my chest was a cold, hard diamond. Something legal. And serious. She didn't hesitate for a second. The sound of her office door closing softly came through the line. "I'm listening." "I think my parents just sold a house that didn't belong to them." A pause. I could almost hear her recalibrating, shifting from friend to the sharp, brilliant litigator I knew her to be. "Say that again, Lee." Slower. I told her everything. The call, their beaming faces, the casual evisceration of my peace, their proud announcement that they had liquidated my property to pay for my sister's fairy tale wedding. I told her how they'd framed it as a gift from me, the final, perfect act of erasure. "But here's the thing," I said, my voice flat and cold as I opened a PDF on my screen, the current property record from the county assessor's office. "They didn't sell my house. They sold a property belonging to Waymand Holdings." "Your holding company," Ashley said. And a new, grim tension crept into her voice. "The one from grad school. You actually used it." "The very one. I transferred the title years ago. I just checked the registry. The house is still legally registered to Waymand. They must have found the old deed, the one with my name on it, in the safe. Or they just forged a new one." I took a sharp breath. "Ashley, they must have forged my signature on the sale documents." "My God, Leona." Her voice was a whisper, laden with the weight of that single, criminal act. "They always knew where the key was. They knew where I kept the important documents, or at least the ones they thought were important. I never thought I needed to protect it from them." "You didn't just trust them," Ashley corrected, her tone now razor-sharp and analytical. "You bankrolled them. You gave them access, and they used it to commit a felony. Several felonies." I slowly exhaled, the air leaving my lungs in a long, controlled stream. That word, felony, made it all terrifyingly, incontrovertibly real. This wasn't a family disagreement. This was the law. If they've already cashed the buyer's deposit check, it can be traced. The whole transaction is a house of cards. I minimized the real estate files and leaned back in my chair, my gaze drifting back to the turned-around photograph. For the first time since the call, I felt a flicker of something other than cold shock. It was a spark, small and fierce. "I have a chance of winning this, don't I?" I asked, though it wasn't really a question. Ashley gave a short, bitter laugh. "Win? Leona, you don't just have a chance. You have a nuclear bomb." Forgery, fraudulent misrepresentation, misappropriation of corporate assets. This isn't a family squabble you can smooth over with a check. This is a crime, with discovery, depositions, and potentially jail time. For your parents. I looked at the screen at the thumbnail of the ended video call, forever capturing their smiling, oblivious faces. They thought they'd gotten away with it. They thought I would just nod, send a tastefully expensive gift, maybe even offer to pay for the band. They had sailed over to my island, as Ashley had once warned me they would, and now they were burning it down for a wedding bonfire. "I've been sending them money for years," I said, the confession quiet in the sterile office air. "The mortgage, the credit cards, Brianna's student loans. I didn't need a thank you. I didn't need acknowledgement. I didn't want them to drown." Ashley's voice softened, but only a fraction. "And in the process, they ended up drowning you. You should have cut them off a long time ago. You tried to build yourself an island, Lee. But they just commandeered the ferry." I didn't reply. My mind was already racing ahead, past the hurt, past the betrayal, to the cold, hard mechanics of the problem. My fingers were already hovering over the keyboard, drafting the first email in my head. My hand wasn't shaking. Not this time. "And let me guess," Ashley said, the steel returning to her voice. "You're not calling me just to vent." "No," I answered, my voice clear and certain for the first time all day. The spark in my chest had caught, igniting into a cold, steady flame. "I'm calling to fight." The template was already in her files, a relic from a corporate dispute Ashley had handled the previous year. We made the edits in a shared, encrypted document, a cold, clinical process. We swapped the names of the aggrieved parties, the dates of the fraudulent transaction, the parcel number of my land. It was drafted, reviewed, and formally approved by the sole governing body of Waymand Holdings, me. The irony was not lost on me. The very isolation my family had always derided was now the fortress from which I would mount my defense. Within 48 hours of their gleeful video call, a notice of intent to void sale and preserve legal rights was drafted, notarized, and sent via certified mail to my parents' address in Burlington. There was no cover letter, no personal note, no threat. It was a document stripped of all emotion, a scalpel of legalese. It stated, in unambiguous terms, that the sale was unauthorized. The signatory had no legal standing, the buyer had been materially misled, and all funds were immediately frozen pending a formal fraud investigation. Waymand Holdings was asserting its rights. That was all. I didn't scream. I didn't plead. I didn't even call to ask how they could do this. The time for questions was over. Instead, I opened our old family group chat, a digital ghost town that had been silent since my mother's birthday the previous year. The last message was a generic "Happy Birthday, Mom" gif from Brianna that I had liked but not commented on. I typed 2 words, my fingers steady on the keys. "Check your mail." Then I closed the app, slammed my laptop shut with a definitive thud, and put the kettle on. The whistle built to a scream, a sound that echoed the one trapped in my own chest. I poured the boiling water over the tea leaves and watched them swirl and darken, a tiny storm in a porcelain cup. I sat in the deepening silence of my apartment, the only sound the sharp, rhythmic clink of a silver spoon against the china as I stirred in a single cube of sugar. The silence was sharp, but it was not empty. It was heavy with purpose. For years, they had wanted me to be quiet, compliant, the reliable, background noise that kept the house lights on and the bills paid. I had given them that. Now I was giving them a different kind of silence, the silence of a drawn line, the silence of a locked door. It was a form of quiet they didn't know how to handle. By the next morning, the silence on my end had been met with a flurry of digital panic. 3 new messages were blinking on my screen, each a different flavor of alarm. One from Mom, sent at 8:03 p.m. "Sweetie, is something wrong?" The mailman brought a very strange official-looking letter today. It's all legal jargon. Did you send us something? One from Dad, sent at 9:47 p.m., Leona. We need to talk. Call us as soon as you get this. It's important. And one from Brianna, sent at 11:12 p.m., a masterpiece of self-absorbed indignation. Is this about your stupid lake house? Seriously? Now? My wedding is in 6 weeks. I didn't formulate a reply. I didn't agonize over the tone. I simply took a screenshot of the notification panel and forwarded all 3 to Ashley with the subject line, "First contact." Her reply was swift and succinct. "They're panicking. The buyer's agent will have received his copy by now. Stand by." A grim sense of satisfaction, cold and clean, settled in my stomach. Good. I put my phone face down on the glass table and looked out the window at the unyielding gray sky over Boston. I hadn't won yet, not by a long shot, but the tectonic plates of our relationship had irrevocably shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one waiting for their approval or their forgiveness. I wasn't the one scrambling to clean up a mess I hadn't made. This time, they were standing in the eye of a storm they hadn't seen coming, and I was the one who had conjured the clouds. The first official ripple in their carefully constructed fantasy arrived in my inbox at 6:42 a.m. from Hallie Gilmore, the wedding planner. The subject line was a professional, yet urgent. Payment issues. Gilmore wedding. Hi Leona, it began, polite and slightly apologetic. I'm writing to follow up on several payment reversals related to the upcoming event. The venue, Clifton Manor, requires immediate confirmation, and the florist is asking for a new deposit as the first one was returned. I've tried your parents, but they said you were handling the financials. Can you or someone from your family please call me back at your earliest convenience? I read it once, then archived it. I didn't respond. By noon, 5 more emails from Hallie had piled up. The tone had shifted from polite inquiry to thinly veiled anxiety. The band requires cash payment up front, as per their contract. Grand Vista Caterers warns they will release the date if they don't hear back within 48 hours. The calligrapher for the invitations is on hold. Please provide feedback ASAP. Each message was a thread beginning to fray in the elaborate tapestry of Brianna's perfect day. I took screenshots of every one and forwarded the collection to Ashley. She replied with a single emoji. Meanwhile, in the parallel universe of social media, Brianna was performing bliss. Her Instagram had become a relentless countdown, a stream of soft-focus photos in a curated palette of blush and ivory. There she was, in a lacy robe, holding a flute of champagne. Another of her manicured hands, the ostentatious diamond engagement ring glinting, resting on a stack of bridal magazines. The captions were a study in obliviousness, final fitting before the big day. Can't wait to marry my prince. #blessed and blushing, #Gilmore wedding. The comments section was a chorus of heart emojis and effusive praise, goals, dream wedding, perfect couple. None of her followers knew that the financial foundation of this dream was collapsing, that checks were bouncing, and vendors were starting to grumble. The illusion was holding, but I, from my silent vantage point, could see the hairline fractures spreading across its surface. That evening, I opened a bottle of Cabernet and read the latest email from Hallie. It was marked urgent, response required. The professional veneer had cracked completely. Hi Leona, it pleaded, 7 vendors have now sent cancellation warnings. I've tried calling your parents repeatedly, but no one is responding or they are being evasive. I need to know what is going on. My name is on some of these contracts. My professional reputation is on the line here. Please. I took a long, slow sip of wine, the rich, dark flavor a stark contrast to the sterile reality of the situation. I still didn't respond. They had built this beautiful, elaborate fantasy on money that wasn't theirs, on a house that wasn't theirs, and on the unshakable confidence that I, Leona, would always be there to absorb the shock, to smooth things over with my silence and my checkbook. But silence is not surrender. It can also be a weapon. My silence now was a wall, and they were about to crash into it at full speed. I poured myself another glass and opened the file Ashley had sent me. It was no longer a notice of intent. It was a formal motion for a temporary injunction and a preliminary fraud complaint, prepped and ready for filing with the county court first thing in the morning. This was no longer a warning shot across the bow. This was the torpedo hitting the hull. At 9:15 a.m. the next day, Ashley filed the motion. The clerk's office sent an automated confirmation of receipt. The judge assigned to the case, a man Ashley assured me had no patience for property fraud, was known for his speed. By 2 p.m., his ruling came through. A temporary injunction was granted. The sale was officially frozen. The funds from the buyer were flagged by the title company as potentially fraudulent. A formal investigation was initiated. Waymand Holdings' legal claim was no longer just an assertion, it was a court-recognized fact. My parents hadn't just sold a house, they had attempted to launder stolen property through a system that ran on trust and legal precedent, a system they assumed would never question them. Their closed loop of privilege and overconfidence had been breached. I didn't need to announce the victory. The avalanche, once triggered, gained its own momentum. By the end of the day, my phone, which had been dormant, began to vibrate with a persistent, angry energy. The family chat, a digital tomb for so long, lit up like a distress beacon. "Mom, for 18 p.m. Sweetie, there's some problem with the bank. They won't release the funds for the venue. Can you check with your people? You're so good with these things." "Dad, 4:35 p.m. Leona. We're getting calls from the title agency. They're talking about fraud. What in God's name is happening?" "Brianna, 4:52 p.m. A single, seething text. What did you do?" I watched the notifications stack up, one after another, a symphony of panic. I didn't answer a single one. Then the calls started, 10 missed calls from various family numbers in half an hour. I muted the chat, placed my phone screen down on the cool granite of my kitchen countertop, and listened to the hum of my refrigerator. Let them panic. Let them wonder. Let them feel the ground disappear from under their feet. I opened my laptop to a new flurry of emails. One from the escrow officer, with Ashley CC'd, stating formally, "All disbursements are suspended pending legal review." Another, more frantic, from the buyer's agent, requesting urgent contact to clarify ownership structure. "My client is extremely concerned and is considering legal action against your parents for misrepresentation." I took a long, slow sip of my coffee, the bitterness a welcome anchor. I refreshed the folder containing Hallie's emails. A new one had appeared, the subject line a silent scream, "Help. I'm losing control of the wedding." I leaned back in my chair. She had no idea. She had absolutely no idea how much worse it was about to get. I wasn't enjoying this, not in the gleeful, vindictive way Brianna would have savored it if our roles were reversed. But there was a quiet, almost cruel sense of justice in it, a profound satisfaction in watching cause and effect, so long divorced in my family's universe, finally reunite. They had acted without asking, without checking, without a single thought that I might not lie down and take it. Now the money was frozen. The wedding timeline was in catastrophic shambles. And every one of their frantic calls and messages was hitting the same impenetrable wall, my silence. I closed all the browser tabs except one, the live docket status of the injunction. It read, in stark, comforting letters, active. A new email from Ashley appeared at the top of my screen. It contained only 4 words. "They'll feel it by morning." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I was no longer a participant in their drama. I was the audience, and I just watched. The curtain was rising on the final act. The call came a little after midnight, shattering the purposeful quiet of my apartment. The number was unfamiliar, a Burlington area code, but I knew. A part of me, the part that had been conditioned for a lifetime to answer their distress signals, had been waiting for it. Another part, the newer, harder part, wanted to hear the splintering sound of their reality. I answered on the 4th ring, saying nothing. "Leona." My mother's voice was a frayed wire, thin and crackling with a tension I had never heard before. "Sweetie, please. Please don't hang up." I stayed silent, letting the weight of it press down on her. Then my father's voice came on, a fragile baritone trying and failing to summon its old authority. "Leona, we just need to talk. There's been some kind of a terrible mix-up. Something with the bank, with the title company." "You mean the fraud investigation?" I said, my voice flat and clean as a scalpel. that mix-up. The silence on the other end was profound, a void into which all their excuses tumbled and disappeared. "Leona, we didn't know," my mother whispered, the words a desperate plea. We thought it was just sitting there. We thought you wouldn't mind." My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. It was the calm, unassailable truth, and that made it louder than any scream. That the house was just an asset? That I had no attachment to the one thing I built entirely for myself? That you were entitled to something you never contributed a single dollar or moment of effort towards? "We needed the money," my mother bleated, the justification so childish it was almost pathetic. "For Brianna's wedding, I finished for her." "You had money. I sent you $800 a month for 4 years, Dad. I paid down your mortgage, covered your credit card debt, the car payment you couldn't afford. I wrote the checks for half of Brianna's tuition. Where did you think that was coming from?" Another silence, heavier this time. It was the sound of a fantasy dissolving. I thought it was from your great-aunt's trust," my father mumbled, the lie so transparent it was an insult. "It was," I said, the words ice-cold. "From the relative you raised to be useful, not loved." A sharp, wounded gasp from my mother, then she broke. The tears came, not the delicate, performative ones I was used to, but loud, gulping, ragged sobs that sounded like they were being torn from her chest. "We didn't know it was you," she wailed, as if that were an absolution. "No," I corrected, the finality in my tone absolute. "You just didn't want to know. Because if you knew, you'd have to feel guilty. You'd have to say thank you." And it was so much more comfortable to just take, to pretend the money fell from the sky, magically aligned with all your wants. "We were just trying to keep our heads above water," my father said, his voice hollow. "And I was just doing well." "Yes. And my success, my stability, became your justification. That's why you decided I wouldn't mind you stealing from me. That I would simply absorb the loss, as I always had." "Don't say that word," my mother wept. "We're family." "No," I said, the word quiet but final. "You didn't raise a daughter. You raised a safety net." There was no yelling from the other end, no more excuses. The well was dry. They had nothing left. The scaffolding of their narrative had collapsed, and they were left standing in the rubble. "I was your safety net," I added, driving the point home. "And you tried to cut me down and sell me for parts." I hung up the phone. Not in a rage, not with a slam, but with a soft, decisive click. There was simply nothing left to say. The phone lit up again instantly, a frantic, blinking star in the dark of my apartment. I watched it for a moment, then held down the power button until the screen went black. I remained sitting in the darkness, the only sound the steady, even rhythm of my own breathing. They weren't calling to fix things. They were calling because they had finally, catastrophically, understood what it meant to lose me. 2 days before the hearing, the story broke. A headline appeared in the local Burlington Digital News, and then, like a virus, it spread. "Bride's family accused of real estate fraud to fund $120,000 wedding." I hadn't leaked it, but Ashley had warned me it was inevitable once the court documents became public. I hadn't lifted a finger to stop it. Hallie, the wedding planner, her business and reputation in tatters, had been the one to go to the press. She was quoted, tearful and furious, detailing how she'd been deceived, left holding thousands of dollars in contractual obligations to vendors, her professional credibility obliterated. The court of public opinion convened instantly, and the verdict was merciless. The sympathy was not with the weeping bride. The courtroom felt smaller than I'd imagined, the air thick with the scent of old wood and anxiety. The prosecutor, a severe woman with a no-nonsense bun, laid it all out with methodical precision: the forged signatures on the deed and sale documents, the illegal transfer of funds, the financial trail that led like a blazing arrow straight from my parents' bank account to the assets of Wayman Holdings. I was the first witness called. I took the stand, my posture straight, my hands folded in my lap. I spoke calmly, without tears, without a hint of vengeance. I was just a ledger, reciting numbers, dates, check numbers, transfer records. The cold, hard math of betrayal. My parents sat at the defense table, flanked by a public defender who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. They were frozen, their faces pale and waxy. My mother's hands trembled uncontrollably. Then, in a move their lawyer clearly advised against, Brianna took the stand. The carefully constructed Instagram persona was gone, replaced by a raw, entitled fury. She lasted 3 minutes under the prosecutor's gentle but firm questioning. "She's just jealous." Brianna suddenly shrieked, her fingers stabbing the air in my direction. Her voice echoed in the hushed room. "She's always been jealous of me. She can't stand that it's my turn to be happy, that I'm the one getting married. She has to ruin everything." "Miss Davis, you will control yourself," the judge warned, his voice a low rumble of disapproval. "She doesn't want a family. She never did. She just wants to burn everything down because she's miserable and alone." Security was already moving toward her before the judge had to give the command. They escorted her out as she thrashed, knocking over a chair with a clatter that seemed to suck all the sound from the room. Her fading screams echoed from the hallway. The silence that settled back in was absolute and damning. The judge turned his gaze to my parents. "Mr. and Mrs. Davis," he began, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You have broken not only the law. You have broken a sacred trust. You didn't ask. You didn't discuss. You forged your daughter's signature and treated her property, her personal achievement, as a family ATM to be liquidated for a party." My mother's lip trembled, a single tear traced a path through her powder. My father stared at the grain of the wooden floor as if he could divine an escape route in its patterns. "But when you forged her name," the judge continued, his tone dropping to an icy, final register, "you forfeited the right to call yourselves her family. You rendered that term meaningless." The gavel fell. The sound was a full stop. The charges were formally filed: grand larceny, forgery, fraud. Sentencing was yet to come, but the battle was over. Outside, a small throng of reporters and cameras waited, their lenses hungry. I didn't pause, didn't offer a statement. I just walked, my head high, past the flashing lights and shouted questions, down the cold stone steps of the courthouse. I didn't feel triumph. I felt the heavy, solemn finality of an ending. A week later, I stood on the porch of the lake house. It looked exactly the same. The same peeling white shutters, the same third step that groaned a familiar protest under my weight, the same forgotten wind chimes my mother had bought on a whim. But it no longer felt like mine. I walked a slow funeral march through every room. The furniture was as I'd left it, the books on the shelves, the worn armchair by the fireplace. Everything was in its place, but the soul was gone. The air itself had changed. It smelled of dust and memories, not of home. Every corner, every sunbeam, held the ghost of the comfort it had once offered. Now, it all served as a monument to how easily that comfort could be weaponized, how a sanctuary could become a target. I stopped at the bookshelf, my fingers tracing the spine of a novel I'd read and reread during a long-ago winter, snowed in and perfectly at peace. In this house, I had dreamed. I had made plans that were entirely my own. I had breathed freely, away from the stifling air of their expectations. And then came that chirping video call, casually informing me it was gone. As if it had never mattered at all. I sat on the edge of the bed and looked out at the lake, its surface smooth as polished slate. It had been my proof that I could build something beautiful and self-sufficient without them. Now, it was just a structure, a box full of other people's assumptions and entitlements. I stood up, the decision crystallizing with a quiet clarity. There was no drama, no cathartic scream. I took the keychain from my pocket, the metal cool in my palm, and walked to the kitchen. I laid the keys on the clean, empty countertop, a quiet, deliberate exit from a place that no longer needed me, and that I finally understood, no longer needed. I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. Back in Boston, I sat on the floor of my apartment, the city lights twinkling below like a field of fallen stars. I opened my phone and scrolled through my contacts. One by one, I deleted them. Mom, Dad, Brianna. Every cousin, every aunt who had sent guilt-tripping texts pleading for family unity. It didn't feel like an act of violence. It felt like cleaning a wound, the careful removal of shrapnel so the healing could begin. Then I opened a new browser tab and started an application for an account at a small, local credit union, one with no branches in Vermont, no ties to my past. No joint access, no auto transfers to anyone but myself. Just mine. When the phone rang, I almost let it go to voicemail, but an instinct made me pick up. "This is Detective Rowe," the voice said, "all business. Thought you should know. Your case, it's had a ripple effect. Since your story got out, we've had 3 other adult children come forward with similar stories. Financial abuse, forged documents, the works. Your willingness to stand up is giving others the courage to do the same." I was silent for a few seconds, letting the information settle. It was a different kind of inheritance. "Good," I replied, my voice steady. "Sometimes it takes someone willing to burn it all down." A pause on his end. "From where I'm sitting, Ms. Davis, you didn't burn a thing." A faint, grim smile touched my lips. "No," I agreed. "They did. I just stopped shielding them from the smoke." He was quiet for a moment, then offered a quiet, "Take care of yourself," and hung up. I looked at the dark screen of my phone a little longer, then powered it down completely. That night, I packed a single, small bag. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. No one was supposed to know. The only thing that mattered was the profound, liberating certainty that they could not follow me. At dawn, I boarded a train heading north, toward the Canadian Maritimes. I had no specific address, only an intention to find a quiet inn by the sea, a place with no history, no memories, and no demands. The world outside the window blurred into a rushing tapestry of green and gray and earth. And for the first time in more years than I could count, I wasn't calculating other people's needs. I wasn't anxiously checking my bank account to see if I could cover someone else's mistake. The phone in my lap was dark and silent. No one knew where I was. No one was waiting for anything from me. And for the first time in my entire life, that silence didn't feel like exile. It felt, unequivocally and breathtakingly, like freedom.